He simply sat still, right in the seat he had paid for. No fuss, no demands. And yet, just minutes later, he was mocked in a condescending tone by a flight attendant, threatened by the manager, dragged from his seat like a criminal, all because he didn't look like someone who deserved to be in first class. They thought he was poor. They thought he was powerless. What they didn't know was that they had just humiliated the wrong man. And within 48 hours, the entire airline was forced to hold an emergency meeting. 3 employees were fired, the stock price plummeted, and all of America exploded on social media. Why? Watch until the very end. You'll understand why just a few words from him shook an entire industry to its core. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to update our latest videos. The sky over New York that morning was unusually grey. Thick clouds hung low like an omen for a troubled day, even though for Jamal Carter it was supposed to be a simple one. He arrived at JFK Airport earlier than usual. Dressed in a tailored charcoal grey suit, Jamal wasn't accompanied by an assistant or bodyguard like on previous business trips. Today he was traveling alone. No symbols of power, no extravagance, just a direct flight to San Francisco for the Global Ethics and Technology Conference, where he was the keynote speaker. At 42, Jamal was the founder and CEO of Carter Nova Systems, a $3 billion tech conglomerate known globally for its AI platforms that help businesses eliminate bias in customer service. Ironically, what was about to happen to him would become one of the most vivid examples of blatant discrimination. On a flight for which he had booked a first-class ticket, reserved seat 2A in advance, and was a platinum member of the airline, Jamal wasn't someone who liked to draw attention. When he arrived at the check-in counter for Australis Airlines, he simply offered a polite smile and handed over his booking code. The staff printed his boarding pass without delay. No one suspected a thing, because in the system everything was perfect. Platinum member, first class, seat 2A. At gate 22, he queued up with a few other passengers. No one realized that the quiet black man standing at the back of the line was one of the most powerful figures in American tech, a man whose words could move markets. When boarding began, Jamal calmly walked through the gate, unaware that seat 2A, which he had chosen simply for extra legroom to work during the 5-hour flight, was about to become the center of a media storm and spark an unprecedented reform in the history of Australis Airlines. He placed his sleek black leather briefcase in the overhead bin, took his seat, opened his iPad, and reviewed his presentation. Everything was peaceful, but just 5 minutes later, a woman's voice came from behind him. "Excuse me, sir, but I believe there's been a mistake." Jamal looked up. It was a flight attendant. In her eyes, he saw something he'd seen all his life: suspicion. And in that very moment, a story began. A story that would not only change the fate of one man, but of an entire corporation. "Excuse me, sir," the female voice repeated, this time more clearly. "I'm afraid you're in the wrong seat." Jamal looked up. In front of him stood a flight attendant, probably in her mid-30s, with neatly tied blonde hair. Her name tag read Chloe Barnes. "Seat 2A, Jamal responded calmly, holding out his boarding pass. "My name is Jamal Carter. This is a first-class ticket, and I selected this seat when I booked." Chloe glanced at the ticket, her expression tightening for a split second. But instead of backing off, she offered a polite smile. The kind of strained smile people give when they've already decided you don't belong. "Yes, I see that. But—" Chloe leaned in, lowering her voice as if about to share a delicate secret. "This seat is usually reserved for one of our special platinum regulars. She always takes this spot on morning flights. Would you mind moving to another seat?" Before Jamal could reply, the sharp clack of high heels echoed down the aisle. Lindsay Ashford, a white woman in a cream Chanel suit, approached. Her hair was light brown with highlights, her lips painted red, a Hermes handbag casually hooked on her elbow. She didn't even glance at Jamal. She turned straight to Chloe and said, loud enough for everyone in first class to hear, "Chloe, you know I always sit in 2A. You saved it for me, right?" Chloe smiled, glancing nervously at Jamal, then turned to Lindsay. "Yes, of course. There's just been a small mix-up. I'm handling it now." The cabin fell unusually silent. A few passengers looked up from their magazines. A middle-aged man frowned. An elderly woman shook her head slightly. Jamal looked from Chloe to Lindsay. "Excuse me," he said, his voice still composed. "I booked this seat. I'm also a platinum member." Lindsay finally turned to face him. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe, assessing every detail of his outfit. The suit with no visible designer logo, the understated leather shoes, the Swiss watch that gleamed subtly, but without diamonds. "You're a platinum member?" she asked, barely masking her doubt. "Yes," Jamal replied, holding out a sleek black card engraved with his name, Jamal Carter. Chloe glanced at it again. She clearly registered something, but clung to the default preference. "Of course, sir. But our guest, Ms. Ashford, is a very frequent flyer in this seat. Would you be willing to cooperate?" Jamal sat upright, his gaze calm but firm. "I understand my rights perfectly, and I'm sitting in the exact seat the airline confirmed for me." No shouting, no argument, but from that moment the silent confrontation had begun between a man underestimated for his skin color and modest appearance, and a system used to favoring someone more fitting. Jamal returned to his iPad, but no one in first class realized the man they were trying to remove was the largest shareholder of the very airline they were flying on. Jamal calmly placed his platinum membership card on the small tray table in front of him. The card's glossy black surface stood out against the luxurious white leather of the first-class cabin. Under the soft LED lighting, the silver-embossed words, "Carter, Jamal, Astraeus Platinum Elite," shimmered like an undeniable declaration of status. Chloe Barnes looked at the card. For a fleeting moment, her gaze wavered. Clearly, everything Jamal had presented was valid. But then, her expression quickly reverted to that familiar look, the kind that says, "I know who truly belongs here." "Yes, of course," she said, trying to keep her tone gentle but laced with insincerity. "Mr. Carter, we do see that you're a platinum member. However," she glanced over at Lindsay Ashford, who was now standing casually nearby, idly twisting the bezel of her Cartier watch. "Ms. Ashford is a VIP who flies this route every week for the past 6 years. She's become quite attached to seat 2A. It's almost like her personal seat." Jamal looked at her, his eyes calm yet deep and unwavering. "And what does that mean? That my platinum status isn't enough, unless I look the part?" Chloe blinked, caught off guard. "That's not what I meant. It's just that sometimes the airline prioritizes familiarity to preserve the experience for our loyal guests." "Sure," Jamal replied, "but I am a loyal guest. I chose this airline. I paid in full. I selected this seat. I arrived on time. And now I'm being asked to move because I'm not someone you recognize." His voice never rose, but every word fell heavy, like stones in the increasingly cold, silent air of the cabin. From behind, Lindsay Ashford let out a smirk, her voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Maybe the issue isn't the card itself, but who's holding it?" A grey-haired man in row 1 furrowed his brow. A young woman quietly lifted her phone, placing it discreetly on her tray table, recording silently. Jamal exhaled slowly. He knew exactly what was happening, and he also knew this wasn't the first time he'd been judged by the standards others believed he didn't meet. But this time, they had picked the wrong man. Lindsay Ashford strolled slowly toward her supposed seat, not with irritation, but with the confidence of someone who already knew how this would end. Her ivory Hermes handbag glistened under the cabin lights, and her hand casually rummaged through one of its side pockets, as if searching for something insignificant. Moments later, a small stack of bills emerged, neat, folded precisely into a slim rectangle. Chloe Barnes, still standing nearby, leaned in slightly, almost instinctively. Lindsay didn't look at her. She simply brushed past, letting her hand briefly graze the front pocket of Chloe's uniform, as if helping straighten a wrinkle in her blouse. No one said a word, no one looked directly at what had just occurred. But 3 rows behind, a man wearing headphones, pretending to read a magazine, had his phone placed face up on the tray table in front of him. The camera was rolling. The angle was wide enough to capture everything. Lindsay's hand, the subtle movement, and the flicker of hesitation on Chloe's face. In first class, a place often mistaken for privacy, there are always more watching eyes than people realize. Yet still, no one spoke. Jamal remained seated in 2A, fully aware of the shift in the air. He didn't look toward Lindsay or Chloe. He simply reopened his phone screen, scrolling through the presentation he had planned to finalize during the flight. But in his mind, a thought was beginning to crystallize. If they're choosing people based on money, let's see how they handle real power. Just minutes after Lindsay retreated to the front row with a satisfied smile, a tall figure began walking toward Jamal. Martin Doyle, first-class cabin supervisor, wore a stern expression, his tie knotted so tightly it looked suffocating. Right behind him was Captain Gerald Hunt, thin build, face cold as steel. The two stopped directly beside seat 2A. "Sir," Martin began, his tone smooth and rehearsed from years of protocol, "we need you to change seats to accommodate one of our valued VIP regulars." Jamal looked up, his voice still calm. "As I've already explained to the flight attendant, this is the seat I selected, paid for in full, and I'm a platinum member." Martin shot a glance at Chloe, then turned back to Jamal, his eyes growing colder. "We don't want to escalate this, sir, but if you refuse to cooperate, we'll have no choice but to involve airport security." A quiet gasp escaped from a nearby passenger. The atmosphere in first class thickened instantly. Captain Hunt stepped in, voice clipped and authoritative. "You are not permitted to interfere with the flight's operations. Refusing a seat change request may be considered disruptive behavior." Jamal frowned slightly. "Disruptive? For sitting in the seat I was assigned." Martin leaned in closer, voice low, but still loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "We can handle this quietly. Or by the book, which means removing you from this aircraft." Several passengers turned their heads, whispering to each other. Across the aisle, the man with the phone kept recording, his lens now capturing Martin, Captain Hunt, and Jamal's strangely composed reaction. Jamal inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply placed his tablet on the tray table, locked his phone screen. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. His voice low, but it echoed across the cabin. And with those 6 words, he unwittingly triggered a tidal wave that was about to crash down on Australis Airlines. "I'm not going anywhere." 6 words, not shouted, not angry, yet the sound of them seemed to tear through the suffocating tension in first class like a blade. Jamal Carter unlocked his phone and switched to video mode. The screen lit up, reflecting his calm face. And the 3 people now standing before seat 2A, Supervisor Martin Doyle, Captain Gerald Hunt, and Flight Attendant Chloe Barnes. The very individuals who had just ignited an act of blatant discrimination. "Please clarify for me," Jamal said, raising the camera. "Am I being asked to leave a seat I purchased, with my name on it, simply because another passenger wants to sit here?" Martin immediately turned his face away, glancing at Captain Hunt. "Call security," he ordered without hesitation. Captain Hunt strode quickly toward the cockpit. picking up the internal phone. Meanwhile, Chloe made one last attempt to regain control. "Sir," she said, forcing a tight smile, "recording inside the cabin violates our policy." Jamal kept the camera steady, his voice cool and firm. "There's no federal law prohibiting me from filming as long as I'm not interfering with flight operations. I'm protecting myself." A ding sounded from the back of the cabin. A passenger, hidden 2 rows behind and secretly recording from the start, had just uploaded the first clip to Twitter. Captioned, "First class doesn't mean first in racism, Astreus discrimination." Cell signals began to flicker as nearby passengers reached for their phones. Some started filming, some were typing furiously, others simply watched, their eyes filled with confusion and growing outrage. Across the aisle, Lindsay Ashford, the catalyst of it all, sat with arms crossed, reclining smugly, eyes gleaming with triumph. Martin saw the recording still in progress and clenched his jaw. "We've given you fair warning. If you do not comply, you will be removed from this aircraft. That is your final option." Jamal looked up, camera still rolling. "And I'll let the world see it." Every eye was now on them, a standoff between a calm, dignified passenger and an entire system trying to force him out. What none of them realized was that the man they were preparing to drag off this flight held the fate of Astreus Airlines in his hands. 2 security officers in Navy uniforms entered the first-class cabin through the front door. Their eyes scanned the room quickly before settling on the composed black man seated at 2A, phone still recording. "Mr. Carter," one of them asked, voice neutral but tinged with hesitation, "we've been asked to escort you off the aircraft." The entire first-class cabin seemed to hold its breath. Jamal looked up, his expression remarkably calm. "I'll leave my seat if you can show me which policy I've violated. I have a valid ticket, a platinum membership card, and I'm seated exactly where it says I should be." The second officer glanced at Martin Doyle, who stood behind them looking agitated. Martin nodded forcefully, clearly impatient. "This individual is disrupting the boarding process," Martin announced loudly for all to hear. "He's delaying the flight. Please remove him." Jamal remained still. His phone continued to capture every look, every word. 1 row back, a woman, the same passenger who had filmed Lindsay slipping money to Chloe, whispered to her seatmate, "He didn't do anything wrong. I got it all. Sending it now." Despite their unease, the security officers had a job to do. "We're sorry, Mr. Carter," one said quietly. "We ask for your cooperation." Jamal nodded. He ended the recording, stood up, and gathered his belongings. Each movement slow, deliberate, dignified. No angry words, no pleading glances. He walked between the 2 officers, head held high, leaving the cabin in utter silence, watched by nearly 30 stunned first-class passengers. Lindsay Ashford slowly slid into seat 2A, smirking in triumph. She reclined, accepted a glass of champagne from Chloe, and said as if the entire confrontation had been nothing but a passing breeze, "Right back where I belong." A passenger near the window shook his head. "Unbelievable. They just kicked off the wrong man. And they're going to pay for it." Outside, in the airport terminal, Jamal Carter pulled out his phone. On screen, the name Renee Wallace, COO. He tapped call. His voice was steady, low, and crystal clear. "Activate Plan B. Assemble legal and PR. We move forward." As the automatic doors of the terminal slid shut behind him, Jamal Carter paused for a moment. The looks still lingered in his mind. Chloe's condescending gaze, Lindsay's triumphant smirk, and Captain Hunt's cowardly silence. But Jamal didn't lash out. He simply pulled out his phone and typed a short message. "Renee, call in the full legal team. Media 2. Emergency meeting. Priority code, Indigo." Within 3 minutes, the first wave of action was already in motion. Across the city, at the headquarters of Carter Nova Systems, Chief Operating Officer Renee Wallace, a sharp-eyed African-American woman with the poise of a former Pentagon strategist, stood up abruptly from a boardroom table. "Cancel everything," she said, her voice so flat and cold that her assistant shivered. Jamal was just removed from an Australis Airlines flight. They messed with the wrong person. The 21st floor war room was locked down, 3 giant screens lit up. Live footage from the airport, a personnel list tied to the incident, and the first viral video recorded by a passenger, showing Lindsay slipping cash into Chloe's uniform pocket. A legal analyst gave a rapid update. Clear evidence, discriminatory bias, bribery, and violation of flight procedures. The clip is already starting to go viral. "No response from the airline yet?" Renee asked. "None. They don't even know who they just kicked off their plane." Renee looked around the room. "Good. Let's keep it that way. Until it's too late." Another assistant whispered, "CEO Douglas Pierce of Australis is probably still in the dark. He's expecting to finalize the deal with us next week." Silence fell across the room. Everyone knew that deal was worth $50 million. And with a single nod from Jamal, the future of Australis Airlines could be obliterated within 24 hours. Renee tapped her fingers lightly on the table. "Let the world see. No one humiliates Jamal Carter without consequences." Just 3 hours after Jamal Carter was escorted out of first class, the first video surfaced on social platform X, formerly Twitter. A shaky handheld clip, but unmistakable, flight attendant Chloe Barnes lowering her head, accepting a folded stack of cash from Lindsay Ashford, followed by Jamal's calm voice, "I'm not going anywhere." From there, everything exploded like a wildfire no one could contain. The hashtag #Justice for Jamal began trending rapidly. Within 30 minutes, more videos emerged. Different angles capturing Lindsay's arrogance, Martin Doyle's condescending glare, and the chilling silence as Jamal was escorted off the plane like a criminal. A TikTok influencer with 3 million followers posted a reaction video. A black man dragged from a first-class seat that he paid for just because a white woman usually sits there. That's sick. On Facebook, a viral post with an attached video read, "This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was classism and racism. And it happened in the sky." Shares skyrocketed. Within 6 hours, the first clip passed 10 million views, and major media outlets jumped in: CNN, BBC, The New York Times, all broadcasting breaking headlines about the incident on Australis Airlines Flight AA402. Inside the war room on the 21st floor of Carter Nova Systems, Jamal Carter sat silently before a massive screen, tweets and angry comments flashing by in real time. No rage, no chaos, just a silence, heavy with intention. Renee Wallace approached him. "Do you want us to issue a press statement?" Jamal shook his head. "Not yet. Let them bury themselves a little deeper. What they thought was a minor scuffle with an ordinary passenger is a tsunami they still don't see coming." A second later, Renee's phone buzzed. An internal message from the market analytics team. Australis just dropped 4.8% in market value over the past 30 minutes. No signs of stopping. Jamal stared at the number, then his lips curled into a cold, deliberate smile. Time to show them exactly who they messed with. At the top floor of Australis Airlines headquarters in Manhattan, CEO Douglas Pierce had just wrapped up a quarterly meeting with investors when his personal assistant burst into the room, breathless, holding out an iPad still playing a video. "Mr. Pierce, you need to see this, right now." He frowned, adjusted his tie, and took the device. On screen was a video spreading like wildfire, a black passenger being forced out of first class by a flight attendant and the cabin supervisor, despite presenting a valid ticket and platinum membership card. The footage showed a white woman taking seat 2A, right after slipping money into the attendant's hand. At the same moment, PR director Janet Voss appeared in the doorway, her voice trembling. The clip has over 18 million views in just 7 hours. #justice for Jamal is trending #1 worldwide. And media outlets, they won't stop calling. Douglas responded coldly, "It's just an angry passenger. Issue a standard apology statement, it'll blow over." But then the chief financial officer stormed in like he'd seen a ghost, face pale as paper. "This is no longer about one passenger, sir. Our stock just dropped over 12%. "What? And it's still falling. Analysts are calling it a crisis of trust. Some of our tech and finance partners are threatening to pull out. Unless we resolve this immediately." Douglas began to sweat. He turned to Janet. "Who is this passenger? Have we confirmed his identity?" Janet looked down at her phone, her voice shrinking. "Yes, sir. His name is Jamal Carter." The entire boardroom fell into dead silence. "What? Say that again?" "Jamal Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Nova Systems." In that instant, the room felt like it imploded without a sound. All eyes locked on Douglas Pierce Dash, now frozen in place as if struck by lightning. Then came the final blow from the head of external affairs. "Carter Nova is the same company we've been negotiating the $50 million systems integration contract with." And, she hesitated, "they increased their equity stake last year. They now own 25% of Australia's Airlines." Douglas collapsed into his chair, defeated. "God help us. We just kicked our largest shareholder and primary tech partner off a plane, on video, in front of the whole world." At that point, every excuse, every spin, was meaningless. Inside the executive office at Australia's Airlines headquarters, Douglas Pierce still hadn't recovered from the blow. When the internal phone rang sharply, "Mr. Pierce," his assistant said over the intercom, "it's Jamal Carter on the line. He says you'll want to take this call." Douglas froze. He nodded stiffly, then pressed the button, trying to steady his voice. "Mr. Carter, don't waste time apologizing." Jamal's voice came through, even measured and ice-cold, not angry, just lethal. "I didn't call to hear excuses." Douglas swallowed hard. "I'm the man your team insulted, humiliated, and removed from a flight. All because I didn't look like someone who belonged in first class." Douglas took a sharp breath, but Jamal cut in again, his words sharp as blades. "I'm Jamal Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Nova Systems, and the largest shareholder of the airline you run, with 25% equity as of last quarter." A chilling silence followed. "Remember that $50 million systems modernization deal Astraeus has been counting on? Bad news. I'm the one who signs off on that contract." Douglas slumped back in his chair. Cold sweat soaked through his shirt. Then came the next blow. Jamal's voice, steady and merciless. "We've been quietly evaluating Astraeus Airlines for months, watching how you treat passengers, your employees, your internal culture. Today you showed me everything I needed to see. In just 15 minutes. I'll be calling for an emergency shareholders meeting tonight, and you'd better be ready to explain why you're destroying the reputation, the stock, and the future of this company." Douglas opened his mouth, but there were no words left that could undo the damage. And then Jamal spoke one final time. "Have a pleasant evening. Oh, and if you need advice, never underestimate the man in seat 2A. The line went dead. Douglas collapsed forward at his desk. Outside, a media storm was already raging, but the real tsunami had just called him, on his personal line. 9 p.m. The executive boardroom on the 41st floor of Astraeus Airlines headquarters blazed with light against the darkness blanketing Los Angeles. Every board member, legal advisor, financial strategist, and senior executive had arrived. Some still in golf attire, others straight from the airport. The tension was suffocating. Everyone knew tonight could determine the fate of the entire airline. The doors opened. Jamal Carter stepped in. He didn't say a word. And yet the entire room fell instantly silent. He was still wearing the same charcoal grey suit he had worn. When he was dragged from seat 2A, a silent, unmistakable statement. Behind him walked COO Renee Wallace, the general counsel, the head of communications, and an assistant carrying a briefcase containing special documents. Douglas Pierce stood up, forcing a strained smile. "Mr. Carter, Jamal raised his hand. No anger, no shouting, just absolute authority, wrapped in silence. "I'll get straight to the point," Jamal said, his voice ringing through the polished wood-paneled room. "I have two things, one demand and one decision." "First," he said, "all individuals directly involved in this morning's incident. Flight attendant Chloe Barnes, supervisor Martin Doyle, and Captain Gerald Hunt must be terminated immediately, no negotiations." Every eye turned to Douglas, who was now visibly drenched in sweat. Second, Jamal pulled a file from the briefcase and dropped it on the table with a thud. "If that demand is not met, I will liquidate my entire 25% equity stake and terminate the $50 million systems modernization contract. Carter Nova Systems is currently negotiating with your company. That action will trigger other investment groups to pull out. Your stock will nosedive, and I will redirect all technology assets to your largest competitor." The room went dead. A finance director tried to speak up. "We understand the severity, but perhaps a temporary suspension." "No," Jamal cut in sharply. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to set a moral standard." He walked slowly around the table, his eyes meeting every single board member. "If someone like me, a first-class passenger, can be treated that way, how many people without a voice are being mistreated every day? This wasn't a mistake. This is a reflection of your corporate culture." No one dared argue. The board nodded in heavy silence. Jamal gave a slight nod in return. "I expect written confirmation of those terminations by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Then, and only then, we can talk about the future." He didn't stay for discussion. He turned and walked out the door. And in that heavy, breathless room behind him, an entire corporation had just been overturned by a man they once tried to remove from his seat, using nothing but truth and unshakable resolve. 9:02 a.m. the next morning. 3 names: Chloe Barnes, Martin Doyle, and Captain Gerald Hunt. Received urgent emails from Astraeus Airlines HR department. The subject line was just 4 words: "Meeting room 17B, now." They arrived, none of them knowing exactly why, but the stares from colleagues in the hallway said it all. When they entered the room, they found the HR director, a legal advisor, and, unusually, 2 security personnel in black suits, stationed silently in opposite corners. No pleasantries, no small talk. "We'll get straight to the point," the HR director said, voice like ice. "Following last night's emergency board meeting and overwhelming social media evidence, the board has reached a decision. Your employment with Astraeus Airlines is terminated, effective immediately." No one moved, no one spoke. Martin Doyle gripped the armrest of his chair, face flushed, veins bulging at his neck. "I was just following protocol." He was being disruptive. "We have video evidence showing that not only did you fail to de-escalate the situation, you enabled the biased behavior and participated in the removal of a discriminated passenger." The legal advisor cut in coldly. "A serious violation of professional ethics." Captain Hunt just bowed his head. His eyes were red, lips tightly pressed together. 30 years in the cockpit, undone by one moment of silent cowardice. As for Chloe Barnes, once proud to call Lindsay Ashford her main tipping client, She now whispered, barely audible, "I know I was wrong. I just didn't want to lose my job if I refused." "And now you've lost it anyway," the HR director replied, "because you chose silence, when what was needed was a voice." They were escorted out of headquarters with nothing but cardboard boxes containing their personal belongings. The entire office turned to watch. No one spoke. No one stepped in. That scene, those who once smirked at an innocent passenger now walking out under cold stares and whispers of contempt. No excuse, no tears, could undo the consequences of prejudice, because in a world that's changing, discrimination is no longer forgivable as a mistake. It's a stain, and stains must be erased. That afternoon, in the main auditorium of Astreas Airlines headquarters, over 800 employees from every department had been summoned. On stage stood CEO Douglas Pierce beside Jamal Carter, the man who, just 24 hours earlier, had been cruelly removed from one of their planes. No PR lights, no fancy speeches, just truth, laid bare, and a decision that would forever change the face of the airline. Douglas looked across the room, his voice low but firm. Yesterday, Astreas failed, not just in serving one passenger, but in upholding basic human dignity. And because of that, starting tomorrow, all operations will be suspended for 48 hours. Gasps, murmurs, eyes wide with confusion and disbelief, to halt every flight. In the airline industry, that was an earthquake. But Douglas continued, gesturing toward Jamal. "We're starting over, from the roots, and the person who's going to help us do that is the very man we once dismissed." Jamal stepped forward. He didn't need a microphone. His voice carried, steady, clear. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for the millions of others like me. The ones without a voice, without a video to prove what happened. We can't change the world if we're not willing to change where we stand." He introduced the reform program, the Path Forward Initiative, a sweeping retraining campaign designed by Carter Nova Systems, integrating AI, behavioral psychology, and immersive response simulations. Every employee, from flight attendants and pilots to office staff and executives, would undergo mandatory participation, no exceptions. "This isn't a morality seminar," Jamal emphasized. "This is a wake-up call. No one is born prejudiced, but if we don't teach each other to see with kindness, then the default will always be bias." In the front row, a young flight attendant blinked back tears. A maintenance worker in a blue jumpsuit nodded silently. The atmosphere shifted. From guilt to readiness, Astreas had hit rock bottom. But in that moment, they began to rise. 6 months later, on a crisp, early autumn morning, Jamal Carter walked into the first-class lounge of Astreas Airlines at JFK Airport. No paparazzi, no media frenzy, just a routine flight, but the atmosphere was entirely different now. A new flight attendant, uniform crisp and posture poised, gave a respectful nod as he approached. "Welcome, Mr. Carter. We're honored to serve you today. Thank you for returning." Jamal smiled, not at the gesture itself, but at the genuine sincerity in their eyes. Onboard passengers were greeted warmly. Every small act, from water service to seat guidance, reflected one thing: Astreas had truly changed. The Path Forward Initiative had completed its first phase. Over 6,200 employees had undergone deep retraining on awareness, equity, and human interaction. Customer satisfaction rose by 31%. Stock values rebounded, and most importantly, dignity was restored. At an internal press conference, CEO Douglas Pierce stood before his team. "We lost our way, but today, with the support of Carter Nova Systems, we are not just an airline. We are a symbol of accountability, relearning, and moving forward." He turned to Jamal, visibly emotional. "Thank you for not walking away, but for coming back and offering your hand." Finally, Jamal came face to face with the three people who once had him removed from that flight. Chloe Barnes, now working in logistics, starting over from scratch. Martin Doyle, a standout participant in the Path Forward program. Captain Hunt, no longer flying, but now teaching a course called Ethics in Aviation. They didn't beg for forgiveness, they chose to stand, through their actions. And Jamal? He shook each of their hands, not to erase the past, but to say, change is the hardest journey, but if you're willing to begin, I'm willing to walk beside you. Australis Airlines, once a symbol of arrogance, had become a blueprint for an entire industry. Because one black man dared to say, I'm not going anywhere. Because he didn't seek revenge. He chose to turn injustice into momentum and transformed those who once caused harm into proof that transformation is possible. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives in a calm voice and an outstretched hand. If you've ever been judged by appearances, if you believe compassion can change a system, share this story. Because justice doesn't need a fancy suit. It only needs a steady heart. If you've ever been treated unfairly because of your appearance, your skin color, or your background, remember the story of Jamal Carter, a man who quietly sat in the seat he had paid for, only to be dragged from it simply because he didn't look like a first-class passenger. But he didn't scream. He didn't seek revenge. He rose with wisdom, resilience, and grace, and through that strength, he made an entire airline bow its head and forced the world to take a long, hard look at itself. If this story brought tears to your eyes, made you feel vindicated, or simply restored your faith in justice, share this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment the phrase, I'm not going anywhere. Let's spread this message together, because sometimes the quietest act can echo the loudest.